up and say that I know that many people that are viewing this presentation today have a deep knowledge of Chinese culture and history, but there might be a few that don't. And so I hope that those that do will bear with me when I say that, of course, China, a place of continuous civilization for thousands of years, a place of incredible works of art of all different types of media, a place that has influenced not only its neighbors in terms of the art and culture, but also has influenced the greater world. So an incredible place, and we are going to be focusing on ceramics today, particularly porcelain from the Qing Dynasty. However, I do want to add that there has been amazing moments of porcelain production and ceramic production in China throughout the history of China. So we are focusing on this one moment, but please, I know and understand that there are some amazing other moments in the history of Chinese porcelain and ceramic production. So the Qing Dynasty, as many of you know, was a dynasty that started in the 1600s and ended around 1912. Let's continue. And just to set the stage a little to understand what was happening in the Qing Dynasty, the rulers of the Qing Dynasty came from outside of China. They came from the northeast, as you can see here. And the previous dynasty, the Ming Dynasty, was another amazing moment for the production of ceramics and porcelain. But towards the end of that dynasty, there were some issues that allowed an opening for the people of this area to come in and take over China, and that's what occurred. And they created a new dynasty, the Qing Dynasty. And again, I know there are many people here that know and understand that, but for those that might not be aware, what you're seeing here is a map of China, and you're actually seeing the outer limits of what the Qing Dynasty will take over. So this was a moment of incredible stability once the Qing Dynasty had settled the area. A moment of incredible stability. And when we have that, we are going to see amazing things happen in art. And one of our inquiries when we're looking at works of art, I think, should be, why does this work of art look the way it does? And when we ask that question, one of the answers, the first answers, is going to be what's going on in the world around the artist? What's the historical context? And here we have a moment of incredible stability that helps create some interesting porcelains in China. So Qing means pure. We are going to be focusing on the reign of 3 emperors during this dynasty. And during the reign of these particular emperors, that's a reign of a total of about 130 years. So again, that stability is going to make the production of incredible ceramics possible. And we're going to begin, we aren't only going to be focusing on porcelain production. There were many other types of bodies of ceramics being made during this time period, earthenware, stoneware, but we're going to focus on porcelain. And of course, porcelain is almost a glass-like type of ceramic that's made from a substance, kaolin, which China had an amazing amount of incredible material to use for porcelain, which when it's fired, it can be very thin. It's very beautiful, and you can actually hit it with your finger and it'll make a ring. So that is the type of ceramic we're going to be focusing on today. Again, when we ask that question, why does the work of art look the way it does? We really want to know who's paying, who is the patron. And so during this time, we have 3 rulers that are very interested in the production of ceramics, that they actually take a personal interest in the way the ceramics look. So those rulers and their tastes matter when it comes to the way these ceramics were produced. The Kangxi Ruler, who ruled for over 60 years, again, a time of incredible stability, who did many amazing things for the country of China, but who had a personal interest in ceramic production. And we'll be looking a little bit more at what he did during this time period. But one of the things he does do is during the end of the prior reign, the Imperial kilns had been partially destroyed, and he makes it a priority to rebuild those kilns and also kind of revitalize the administration of those kilns. And so for that, we get an incredible range of production that comes from his rule. He was This is one work of many that were produced during that time period, and we're going to discuss that later. But as you can see here, he was not afraid to think about color, even if the sources of those colors came from outside of China, which some of them did during his rule. Of course, over time, the artisans in China will learn how to make some of these colors that initially had come from outside China. But when he was in power, we see some early pigments coming from outside China, which we'll discuss in a minute. The next ruler we're going to be looking at, a ruler who ruled for a shorter time than the other two, but he was so interested in ceramics of the past, and he was a scholar. And so we see during his time frame a kind of revitalization, looking back to the ceramics of earlier times. And so some of that production is quite amazing. Is this the only time in the history of Chinese ceramics or porcelains that there's a looking back to the past? Well, no, it's not. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute or two. But he was really interested and ordered quite a few productions of works of art that reflected earlier time periods, especially time periods like the Qing Dynasty, about 1000 CE. So a time period of incredible, beautiful ceramics that he uses as inspiration for the works that are produced during his reign. And then finally, the Qianlong ruler, who rules again for a very long time, and he is also very interested in the production of ceramics. And when you have rulers that are actually personally involved and thinking about how those ceramics are going to be produced, you will see some incredible things happen. And in particular, in the middle of his reign, we see some amazing works of art occur. This is an example, and we'll be discussing this a little bit later. So what you're looking at here is actually the ghost market, or the shard market, that you can go to the southern part of China today, where porcelains are still being produced in Jin Dejin. And you can go there and you can actually purchase shards like this. But there were a few things that happened in the Qing Dynasty that allowed, first of all, allowed artisans more time to hone their craft. And additionally, besides that, also, there were changes that affected the power and the funds that were being given to the imperial kilns. And one of those changes was that we see that the Qing Dynasty rulers end the hereditary artisan conscription. And this was, prior to this time period, artisans and others would be kind of brought into forced labor, basically, to provide labor for certain projects that were important to the previous emperors. This was ended during the Qing Dynasty time period, and because of that, artisans were then able to have more time to hone their craft. Additionally, during the Qing Dynasty, we see an end to the requirement of landless craftsmen to hand over grain as tax. And in fact, folks who owned land were taxed, but those who were landless were not any longer required to hand over grain. And of course, you can understand that when you have no land and you're an artisan, that would have taken a lot of time to make that happen in the past. So this freed artisans and craftsmen to have more time to be creative and innovative in their ceramic craft. Additionally, a really important thing that happens during this time period is we see that high-ranking government officials are appointed to supervise the imperial kilns. And there had been, of course, people from the court supervising the kilns in the past, but these high-ranking officials have a lot more power in the court, and also are able to advocate for funds coming to the imperial kiln. So that causes a lot of stability in the production as well. And then finally, official kilns start to collaborate, and this wasn't the first time that official kilns had collaborated with private kilns, But we see more of that happening during this time period. And what would happen, of course, and I'll back up and say, for those of you who are interested, there were imperial kilns that were existed to provide porcelain and other ceramics to the imperial court. And then there were private kilns that made works of art for private individuals and also for export. During this time period, the Qing Dynasty, we see more collaboration between the official kilns and the private kilns. For instance, if the official kilns have a large production order that they can't handle, they'd ask, they would have help from the private kilns. And what happens because of this is we see an elevation of the quality of the works generally during this time period. So one more thing before we look at art, and then I am going to be feeding your eyes, because really the more of these works of art you see, the more that excited you will get, I'm sure, about this amazing moment in ceramic production. But I wanted to just talk a minute about tradition and innovation. And again, this is something that many people who study the art and culture of China understand and know. So I'm really speaking to those who are just learning or just starting to learn about this area. So there is generally in China a reverence for the past, a reverence for tradition. And that isn't something like, oh, we do it this way because it's always been done this way, but instead a reverence for the culture of the past, for the ancestors. And that is very important. And we see that happening in the ceramic production of the Qing Dynasty. Of course, we see this in the ceramic production of other dynasties as well. But in the same time, I want us to really think about the fact that the history of Chinese ceramic production is filled with innovation. It is incredible. We can go through all these different moments in the history of Chinese ceramic production and see these incredible innovations. So this reverence for tradition, but also innovation in ceramic production, is something that is always occurring in each time period, and of course is very prevalent in the Qing Dynasty as well. I already kind of let you know that the imperial kilns were situated in the south of China. And this is an area that is today still producing porcelains, but an important place because it had the resources. It had the proper clay. It had the wood that needed to be burned for the kilns. It had the resources, and so it was the perfect place for the production of porcelain. I also tell you that there are many other places in China that were making ceramics and porcelain during this time period, but we are going to be focusing on the production of this particular place. So let's get started. We are going to be looking at 3 types of decoration that occurred in the Qing Dynasty. And these are actually decoration that occurred in other dynasties as well. We'll be looking at monochromatic works, we'll be looking at underglaze works, and then we'll also be looking at polychrome works. And for the most part, there are 3 methods for putting the glaze on a porcelain when it is a monochromatic work, and that is by dipping, brushing, and sometimes by blowing. And so I'll back up and say that we have porcelain. Porcelain is fired at a high temperature. You can just fire it and you'll be able to put liquids in it and it will keep them in just fine. But there is also a glaze, and a glaze can be as simple as just a clear glaze that just produces a shine, or the glaze can be decorative, as we'll see here, with different colors. So that glaze is really what we're going to be talking about today. And what I'm going to be showing you now are a variety of works that are basically one color, so monochromatic, and different glazes that were being used in the Qing Dynasty. And there were so many, and I'm only going to be showing you a few. So this is an area that, if you're interested, is something that I urge you to spend some time delving into this area. If you like what you see here, you will be amazed at the variety of monochromatic glazes that were made during this time period. But this is one Oxblood Glaze, and these red glazes had been produced about 200 years earlier, but had been set aside because they were very difficult to achieve the correct color in the firing process. The Oxblood glaze was a very thin glaze, so when it was put on, it would kind of drip and run. And that's why often you see at the edges of the top, it being very thin, you can often see the body underneath, and it often can be very thick at the bottom. This is another type of red glaze. This particular jar would have been used by the emperors in rituals. This particular one, because it's red, would have been used for at the altar of the sun. But what you're seeing here is a matte finish, a kind of all over evenness, which is very different than the glaze we saw before. And it is in the shape of a ritual vessel that might have occurred earlier in the history of China. And we're going to see that over and over again. We are going to see a looking back in the terms of the forms of the ceramics. And this is something that, again, doesn't just happen in the Qing Dynasty. This is a beautiful peach bloom glaze. And this is actually a very small vase, and it would have been made in a set of several vases that would have been often given as gifts for a scholar's table. And we'll just say that those of you who are students of the history of China understand that scholarship is very important in China. And in order to become a government official in many of these dynasties, you had to take exams. So these would have been given as gifts. This is incredible glaze. It's very, very difficult to achieve this color. There were many names for it: not drunken beauty, or baby face. And I'm not going to go too much more into this because our next speaker has some lovely, examples of this and can talk more to this particular glaze. So I'm going to let him do that because it's incredible. You'll be so amazed to see the things that he has to show you. Now, this is an incredible, I look at this and I just get so excited because this particular vessel, now this vessel was made during the reign of that second emperor that we're discussing, who was that scholar who was really interested in the works of the past, the works of previous dynasties, especially the Sung dynasty, a period from, as you can see, 960 to 1279. And that time period was a time period of incredible, amazing vessels. And so this particular ruler in the Qing Dynasty was very interested in that and ordered many different productions of vessels from earlier time periods, especially the Sung. And this is an example. The shape itself is incredible and is again from earlier time periods, but this flambe glaze is two glazes that are put on, and then during the firing they mix together, and so that's what you're seeing here. There's a third glaze that seems to have been applied as well, perhaps either as with a resist on the bottom, as you can see that clear glaze is kind of not all the way down, but maybe perhaps dipped. And then finally, look at the foot ring. It is amazing. I mean, it's a very solid foot ring for this vessel. So this is an example of what we see during that time frame. He also, as I said, very interested in the history of China and in the history of ceramic production in China, and also ordered vessels like this, which has a black glaze with a brown glaze kind of splattered on it, and is made to look like a ritual vessel from a previous time period. So they're ritual vessels made of bronze that were in different time periods in China, but I'm thinking specifically perhaps of the Shang Dynasty, which was about 1200 BCE, where these vessels would be used in rituals and then perhaps buried in the tomb of an important person. This is a lovely shape. I mean, the shape is like amazing. And this is an amber glaze. And what it has here is secret decoration. So secret decoration, a decoration that is inscribed onto the vessel. And really, you can't see it unless you're very close. So this becomes a really interesting moment when you're viewing the vessel. You kind of just become one really with the vessel. And I've given you an example of what this looks like if you do get very close. And look at these beautiful cloud forms, the cranes, and so on. Very lovely. And again, I'm just feeding your eyes. I'm hope I'm whetting your appetite so that you'll be interested and want to engage further with these works of art on your own. This, again, the shape here is amazing. It is absolutely a shape that comes down through the history of ceramic production in China. So the shape by itself is just stunning. But this glaze is very interesting. It is a robin's egg glaze, and it would have had a dark blue put on first, and then a lower fired temperature. There would have been this turquoise that would have been sprayed on, what you're seeing here. Sometimes things were sprayed on through a kind of a bamboo straw with silk over it. So that's one way that can occur. This is incredibly rare. And so just to be able to see this, it's a moment. We're having a moment right now. It's a version of the robin's egg glaze, but here you can see it's called the peacock glaze. Of these kind of moonlight glazes that were made different colors. This particular one is in the shape of, again, a vessel that comes from an earlier period, the Qing Dynasty, and I'll actually show you one of those vessels that this is inspired by. And this particular hue is called the sky after the rain, which is just lovely. Really lovely. But this is what I'm talking about. So here's a ritual vessel, a gu, from the 12th century BCE. And this shape was revered in the history of ceramic production generally in China, and specifically in porcelain production in the Qing Dynasty. And now you can see where that inspiration comes from. Oh, I'll just ask you to remember this decoration here, because we're going to see another vessel in just a minute that reflects this decoration on it. This also an amazing shape, but also this beautiful color, tea dust green glaze, which reminds one of tea leaves that have been ground up, and with variations in firing and also in what's put into this glaze, the color can be changed. This is what I wanted you to think of, this is what I'm thinking about when I asked you to remember the decoration from that Qing Dynasty ritual vessel, because here you're seeing a work of art that absolutely reflects the past in terms of its shape to remind us of ritual vessels, and with a turquoise glaze, but also this lovely decoration, which absolutely is a reverence for the past. So incredible, just incredible vessel. So we have discussed monochromatic glazes, and now we're going to talk about underglazing. And I know that most of us, those of us who think about Chinese porcelain, we may think about blue and white porcelain as we see here. And this is what we are going to be discussing quickly next. And so what this is a type of production where you put the color on prior to the high firing of the vessel. And so there are only two colors in the time that we're talking about in this time period that could be used in underglaze production, and that was blue and red. And if you have an example where the red looks really red because it's very hard to actually achieve, that is a celebration, that's a victory. So let's just look at a few examples. So this, of course, blue and white underglaze pottery or ceramics or porcelain was made, for several hundred years in China prior to the Qing Dynasty, and there are some amazing examples in the Ming Dynasty. And but what we see, especially in the early part of the Qing Dynasty, we see these examples where the artists are starting to use the blue. They're using the cobalt blue in a way where they have several kind of washes, several tones or colors of blue, so light to dark, right? And sometimes these particular vessels are called, five color underglaze vessels. So This is a lovely example, and let's get a little closer. Because I think when we get closer, what you can see, of course, is the variety in the blue tones. So you have the very, very dark tones here to the very almost white tones here. And that is kind of reflecting what's happening in the ink painting as well. So we're getting kind of, and this is, again, not usual to see things that are happening in other media being reflected in ceramic production in China. But notice, I think this is nice to be able to see the variety of colors here, those 5 colors that create a beautiful, just a beautiful moment in this porcelain vase. And of course, we have our scholars here in the landscape so much bigger than the scholars, but they are present, we are there, but the nature is so, beautiful and big and overwhelming. So a lovely example of what was happening, especially in the Kangxi time period. This is a great vessel because it actually documents a certain moment in history. So the story is that an important official comes to the kilns in the south of China, the Imperial kilns, and a number of scholars and meet with him, and they have a day, and they're sharing their poetry with each other. And one of those scholars was also a potter who could actually paint this, and so he made this as a memory of that time period. And so what you see here, of course, is again those different gradations of tone, those different washes that were so wonderful in this time period. But also you're seeing the calligraphy, and of course this is something that happens in painting as well, where we have the image and calligraphy. Calligraphy, as you know, a very, very important, very high art form in China. And so this is just kind of amazing to be able to see that not only this moment documented, but also the poetry and the image together. Just wanted to show you this flask, just another example of the blue underglaze. And notice again the variety in tones here. This shape, the Pilgrim's Flask, again, looking back, actually back to the Silk Roads, which of course are paths, connection of paths that connected China to the West. Where trade of objects and also ideas occurred. And on the Silk Road, folks would carry these pilgrim flasks that were often made of animal skin with water and other liquids, other beverages. And so we start to see this shape very early. Actually, we see it sometimes in bronzes that are buried with folks earlier in time. And we continue to see this shape as we move through the history of Chinese ceramics. And here you're seeing a lovely example here with pomegranates, a symbol of fertility and good fortune, and not just in China, but also in the Near East. And we know that there were many folks in the Near East that just revered the blue and white porcelain of China, and they were folks who actually would engage in trade with China for these objects. So now we're seeing an incredible moment because we are seeing that red underglaze, a successful red underglaze. That, of course, this, as I said, this color would have been fired at that high temperature, and it's beautiful. This is a beautiful shape again, but also notice just the decoration. We have a dragon here. He has 4 claws. If he had 5, we would know that was an imperial dragon. But notice the cloud forms, and of course, this beautiful repetition here, lovely energy here. But this is amazing in itself because of this beautiful red color. Another example that you can go and see at the San Diego Museum of Art, a lovely shape by itself, but again, this lovely red underglaze, a successful underglaze. This ring you're seeing is a kind of an innovation by the people, the folks at the museum to keep this vessel in place if something should occur like an earthquake. But look how lovely this is. And when we have just a little bit of decoration, we really can admire the shape of the vessel. Okay, so we're on our last part, and we are going to be looking at Polychrome Overglaze. And this, of course, many colored glaze. And this would have been, most often these objects were fired with a glaze on it, either clear glaze or white glaze. And then enamels were put on top. Enamels are usually a mixture of pigment and a flux, usually a glass flux. A flux allows the material to adhere to the vessel and also reduces the temperature for that to happen. So these enamels could not have survived a high temperature firing. So often the porcelain, always the porcelain was fired first. And occasionally these enamels were put just on the porcelain without any glaze as well. There were a number of a vast number of overglaze, polychrome overglaze decorations that occurred in the Qing Dynasty. And we're not going to be looking at all of them today. That would take quite some time. I'd be happy to do that, but I know you have the rest of your day you wanted to get to. So we are going to just look at a couple of moments in this polychrome decoration. And we're first going to look at what the West describes as Femi Verde, which is a green family, and often has been called five color ware. And again, another designation for it is hard colors. And this five color ware was happening prior to the Qing Dynasty. So in the Ming Dynasty, you had wares like this. And by the way, five color wares, we might want to consider it more multi-color wares, not necessarily five specific colors. But we see innovations in this type of ware in the early Qing Dynasty during the Kangxi reign. This really is most prevalent during that time period. And it's called Femi Verde in the West because of the predominance of green. These wares were interesting in that they often depicted things that were happening in the world around the artist. So they depicted fiction, they depicted plays, they depicted festivals and things like that. So those are things that often the subject matter of these works. They're called hard colors, and I'll show you why in a second, but they are called hard colors because after the firing, many parts of these decoration felt like they were very solid, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. And we just looked at this, but this, of course, is the Dragon Boat Festival, which is celebrated. And so this is a celebration that's being depicted, and let's look at it just a little closer so I can explain to you why it's called hard colors. And what you're seeing here, by the way, one of the innovations, there's innovation in the color green during this time period, but also these colors are now, you can actually paint them on at different strengths in a way. And so you can have a variety in tone, but look at here, just look how hard, strong these colors are, these kind of solidness about the color here, for instance. You do have lighter colors, but we're not seeing brush strokes here. So there's kind of yeah, I don't really know how to describe it at this moment, but it's a solidness that we see in this that we will see different things happening in the other type of decoration that we're going to explore, the later type of decoration called Femi Rose. And often I think that designation of hard colors is something that is just a way to differentiate the technique a little bit between these two types. Really beautiful, by the way, amazing. This is an amazing depiction on this vessel. Beautiful colors here. And I think here we get a better understanding of what is meant by hard colors. So the solidness to these shapes. There is a kind of, the edges are hard. And occasionally you see a little bit of variation in tone, but for the most part, a solidness to the colors. And when we start to look at the next type, you'll see that things change a bit. Beautiful, just another very beautiful vase depicting historical warriors. So this is very typical of the subject matter of these types of vessels. This is a depiction of a play. So actors engaged in a play, very much, again, the subject matter you would expect from these hard color or five color wares. So the other type, and then we're going to be finishing up. I wish I could talk to you forever about this because it's just such a fascinating area. But the other type that I wanted to present to you today was Femi Rose, which is the Western designation for what was also known as powdered colors and foreign colors. And this is a type of overglaze production. Again, remember, these porcelains would have been fired at a high temperature most often. They would have had a glaze also fired on them, a white glaze or a clear glaze fired, and then these enamel colors would have been painted on and then fired at a lower temperature. And when these first begin, this kind of pink color that you're seeing here was really coming from the West. And so that might be why we often see the designation foreign colors coming from the West. Now, this isn't going to continue. What we are going to see, as I've already told you, are Chinese craftsmen who are going to make, discover their own versions of these colors, and then they will use those in these works of art. But these Femi Rose works of art really start to be favored in the reign of that second emperor that we were discussing. Then we see those greener colors that we saw before, the hard colors or the 5-color ware, the Femi Verde. There's some is still being produced there, but not to the extent that they had been produced prior. And this is a lovely saucer that gives a really nice example of what we're talking about, because most of these would be made with the shape being outlined and then a white enamel being put on the shape, and then these colored enamels being placed on top. And what would happen is sometimes you would see almost a powdery effect, which is why sometimes they are designated as powdered colors, and you can see that here. But if we look down here, and we'll start to see up here as well, look at the variety in tone. So these are washes, and sometimes in some of these works, we can even see the brushwork of the artist. So really beautiful, almost like a watercolor effect on these incredible ceramics. This is another example, and what we start to see at the beginning of this, we see quite a bit of just flowers and things by themselves, and eventually what we start to see are bird and flower arrangements, which of course is a popular subject in painting as well. So we can see again that the culture in other media is being reflected in these ceramics. So this is a very fine example, and you can kind of almost see that powder effect there. And another, I want to just feed your eyes just for a couple minutes, and then we'll be almost done. But here, this is a nice example because you can see just the change in lights to darks here. And you can also see that in the other colors as well. This is really a lovely plate, a lotus pond with a pair of mandarin ducks, right, symbolizing marital happiness. And we just saw this, but this is an excellent example. I mean, this is like a beautiful example. And I think it's a nice opportunity to see that beautiful, just the way that these colors have been painted onto the vessel, and the shading here and the change in color, just lovely, just a lovely example. The shape is incredible too, by the way, an incredible shape. When we get to the later part of the Qianlong reign, so that's that third emperor that we've been discussing, we see a lot of things happening in terms of the porcelain production. And there's a combination of many different ideas that are happening during this time period. And this is an example that there are several ideas happening here, right? So first we have the shape of this vessel, which is reminiscent again of a bronze from a much earlier time period with these handles. And then we have this celadon color. And celadon, of course, that's a name applied to this color from the West, this kind of blue-green color. But this color ware had been made for centuries, for many, many centuries in China, and has been revered because of the color and its association with jade. And jade is a very important substance in China, as most of you know. And it is a very hard substance that also can be a metaphor for strength of character. And this color is revered not only in China, but in other cultures as well. I'm thinking of Korea and in other places. So we have that going on. And then we finally have this overglaze depiction of a landscape, which is actually quite beautiful with, we have calligraphy here as well. So quite a bit going on here, which was not unusual for this time period. And then finally, I have two more vessels I'm going to show you, and then I'm going to wrap up. And this is in a private collection. It was sold within the last year. It's about as big, it can fit in my hand. It's very small. And this work of art brings up another issue, another idea that we need to know about. And that is that although there was an imperial kiln in the south of China, there was also in the Forbidden City a workshop for the painting of vessels like this. So often, especially now, this is from the Kangxi time period, vessels would be produced, the body would be produced in the imperial kilns in the south. And then small amounts of those bodies would be brought up to this workshop, and they would be painted in this workshop. And these works would be specifically for the emperor and his family. And they're extremely rare. They are very rare. And what we're getting here is an example of one of those works where you have a kind of a thickly applied enamel here. This background has been analyzed, and it partially is made of ruby glass. And so this thickly applied enamel that we see here is often associated with that idea of foreign colors that I discussed before. And we know that early on, some of the pink colors, as I said, came from outside of China. So this is an unusual, very rare example. And it has the lotus on this. And we know that the Kangxi ruler was very much enamored by lotuses. He was somebody who thought himself a scholar. Lotus can be, is of course in Buddhism, and is a symbol of purity, but is also a symbol of a fine gentleman in China as well. And we know that the Kangxi emperor would get up, there's stories, get up at 4 in the morning to practice his calligraphy and painting. And so this particular vessel is very, very special and very unusual. And then the final vessel that I want to show you today comes a little bit later in the next rule, the next reign. And this, again, is in a private collection. And I think it is a beautiful example of what we've been trying to talk about when we talk about those powdered colors. So let me give you just a close up for a minute, and then I'm going to wrap this up and say thank you to you. But now you can see this beautiful brushwork, the beautiful shifts in tone and color that come from that Femi rose, that kind of a powdered color application that you're seeing here. And then you also notice, of course, there's kind of a shift in technique when we're looking at these birds. So just a beautiful, incredible example of what was being able to be made in the kilns and in the workshops during the Qing Dynasty. So I just want to thank you so much for your time and attention. And I hope this has whet your appetite. And I hope that you will take some time when you have some time in your life and do some investigation and find the works of art, the ceramics or porcelain that you prefer that were made not only in the Qing Dynasty, but perhaps in other time periods in China as well. Because I promise you one thing though, once you go down this road, you will not want to stop. So don't say I didn't warn you. And thank you very much. I appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Ali, for your wonderful presentation. We can see that you are passionate, so passionate about porcelain in China. And I agree with you totally. Not only have you whetted our appetite, but it is a road of no return. You will continue. So the next person who has gone on this road and is not going to return anywhere soon is Mr. Andy Liu. Andy started collecting porcelain a long time ago. Today, he's going to share with you his private collections, and mostly focusing on the color red, the mystery of making China color red. So if you can join me and 100 people here to welcome Mr. Andy Liu. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. First of all, and thank you for the Ali's presentation. And you see a lot of beautiful Qing Dynasty's porcelain. Today, I'm going to share with you guys is my collection, the Kangxi peach brown porcelain. And this particular one, the difference, this kind of red is have a little green in there. So it's very hard to achieve. The color for this kind of color, peach brown, is between the 1250 and 1280. So the success rate only 3%. That's why the only Kangxi time have this kinds of color. Look at this vase, and we have to introduce a little bit about the Kangxi. This dragon is very ferocity, and because Kangxi, his father died, got mystery, One says died in the missile, in the pandemic. Another one, he says he went to the temple, become a monk. But he don't like the politics. There's two stories. I don't know which one is right, Anyway, Kangxi was 8 years to become a king. They're like a kitty king, And his mother's behind him to help him. So in that time, he really had a lot of hard time. A lot of big shot in the government try to take over him and overpower him. Until 14, he really become a king. He can independent without his mother. Then he eliminate the people against him, like the Alpai, these people. Then he have a very good relationship with the military. And he's a very brave king and very aggressive. So every battlefield, he's on front. So when he was 24 years old, he had the last fight called Zhang. That means he beat the big invader from the north side. After that, he take over Tibet, also take over the Mongolia. So in his dynasty, his territory probably one of the largest in Chinese history. Okay, let's go to the next. This one, we got a close look. You can see he's very ambitious and very, I call it cocky. Look at his crown, the dragon's crown, the holy pearl. Usually, I never see the dragon hold a pearl already. Usually, it's chasing the pearl. This one means he's in control. The country is in his hand, and he's in his control. And I guess this one probably is achieving the Kangxi 30 years, something like that. Because before the 40, Kangxi 40 years, he don't want any mark under the knees. Because he thinks it's a bad luck. If you broken the porcelain, that means his name is going to the copycat, right? So he don't want to do that. So after 40s, he got a much mature king, and he thinks, it's okay. So he started putting his name underneath. It's like 大清康熙年制, this kind of thing. So I guess this one don't have his name on it, but he have a special mark for this vase. And this vase is this mark is very unique. And I cannot show you because I'm afraid somebody saw it when you forged the mark. Let's go to the next. You know, in Kangxi time, the dragon is so powerful. Same thing, you know, in our history. Every dynasty, when they start, the dragon always like that. Like the Yuan dynasty or in the Ming dynasty. Ming dynasty, you know, the Yuan dynasty, the dragon is very, very tough. Only 3 claws. The hair is small and like a snake, you know, because the neck is very, very thin. And you go to the Xuande time, the same thing. The dragon always very powerful. But when the later dynasty, the dragon is very soft, you know. That means, you know, the time the emperor's difference, you know, and so you can show on there these dynasties products. Let's go next. Okay, so this dragon is chasing the pearl, you know, he tried to catch the pearl. And Kangxi time, that one, he already got a pearl in his hand. And also I want to, just by the way, say the Chinese always like a dragon. What's a dragon? Why the Chinese like the dragon? Because thousands and thousands of years ago, the China is a two-tone society. There are so many tribes have their own symbol. Some is a bird, some is a snake, some is a goat, and some is an ox, you know, all kinds of stuff. And one is we call the Yellow King. His symbol is the flag is yellow. And he's the one developed the campus. That's why he conquered all the tribes. You know, when you go to the battlefield, the campus is very important. You know where you go, where you at, you know. After they conquered all the tribes, formed the Zhongguo, the China. So he's very fair. He just said, okay, we take a little part of every tribe. Like I say, then the horse's face, and goats, goatees, and deer's horn, and fish shell, and the snake's body, and the hawk's claw. And he put his color on it as yellow. That's where the dragon come from. That's why the dragon shine, the symbol to unite the Chinese. Okay, let's go next. Okay, this is a big fish plate. These are for the regular people use it. And you know, the Chinese people like a red. So today I'm talking about the red. So this is a red fish. And pretty good, you know. Let's see the next one. See, this one is same kiln, same fish, same type, come to the same time. See, this one, the all red is gone. You only see a little light green. And that's why the red is hard to achieve. In the all kinds of color, red is the hardest one. Let's see the next one. See, this is the tail. Still have a little red in there. You know, just the fire is too high. So the red color is gone. They call the terminology says the colors fly away, you know. Okay, let's go next. Well, this is the same period as Kangxi. Same thing is peach bloom. And this one is just like we saw before, you know, Ali showed some picture on the study room and put on the tables. Totally is about 8 pieces. Very small, it's not big. And I saw this one in the Metropolitan Museum. They have a complete 8 pieces. This place, we can we can tell from the previous the fish plate. See, this is the temperature is too high. That's why the red is gone. Show the green, so many greens come out. You know. And let's see the next one. So this one is an ink pot. See, this one is better than the other one, but still the temperature is not achieved the right temperature. So the red is still too dark, you know, and it's still a little bit higher than can show that's a peach brown color. But this one is better than the other one. At least it's still even. The color is still even. Okay, let's go next. Okay, this is the one he got a mark. So this is after Kangxi 40 years old, he allowed to put his name underneath. No. Okay, let's go to the next. Okay, because we talk about the glaze today, no, and as you know, the most famous glaze is in Chinese history, is in Song Dynasty. In Song Dynasty, there's so many kilns, and only they say that these 5 kilns is most famous one. The first one is called Ru, the second one called Guan, the third one called Ge, the fourth one called Jun, the last one called Ding. And the Ru, for we understand there's only about 280 pieces that exist. Just most of them are in the museums. You know, in the British Museum, and the Gubong in Taiwan, the Gubong in Taipei. And also, you know, I'm talking about, you know, the clay. And you know, the Chinese, you know, the secret formula for hundreds, thousands of years. They don't know how they can achieve these things. They call China. Finally, you know, in the late Qing Dynasty, German figure out because the clay is different clay. We call it Polychrome. After that, the first kiln they made is in the German, they call it Meissen, famous Meissen porcelain. You know? And today the Song Dynasty is so famous, so today still got so many last people still try to imitate their porcelain. But most of them still not 100%, but they're about 70%, something like that. So I compare, you know, this different old porcelain and new one, just like the wine, you know. Everybody like the wine, you know. If you buy some Chateau Rothschild or Chateau something, you know, you have a new one. It's the same thing from the grape. You know, when you taste it, it's different. Only when you taste it, you know the difference. Same thing like us, we can see, you compare with the two together, then you know the difference. And that's why, you know, the people chasing the wisdom and luck, but some of them really doing fine, and it's really, you know, the common clothes now. But you know, the old time the porcelain always used the nature material, you know, and today they use the chemical. So this make a difference also, you know. The color come out is not like good. Okay, let's go next. Okay, thank you everybody, and I appreciate your time. Share